An old man is sitting on a rock in the middle of the sea. The rock is called Patmos. It is small and dry and volcanic. And the man sitting on it is the last one left. Every other man who walked with Jesus of Nazareth is dead by now. Executed, crucified, stoned in a courtyard, or run through with a sword. But not this one. This one they could not kill, so they exiled him instead to a black rock where the wind never stops, and the mainland is just a smudge on the horizon. His name is John, and on a day the church would remember forever, the sky over, that rock tears open, and a voice like a trumpet tells him to write. Write to 7 churches, 7 real churches in 7 real cities, sitting on a curve of coastline he can almost see across the water. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Now here is the thing most people walk right past. We treat these 7 letters like poetry, like symbols, like 7 vague personality types of the church in general. But that is not what they were. Every one of these cities was a place you could walk into. They had street names. They had water systems. They had temples, with the smoke still rising off the altars. And when Jesus dictated each letter, he reached for something the people in that exact city would have seen with their own eyes that very morning. He insulted one church using the temperature of its drinking water. He threatened another one by pointing at a specific building on a hill. He promised a dying church a crown in the one city that was literally shaped like a crown. This is not a story about symbolism. This is not a story about the end of the world. This is not a story about 7 piles of ancient ruins in Western Turkey. This is a story about 7 letters that Jesus wrote to 7 addresses, and the uncomfortable chance that one of them was written to you. Because here is what will haunt you by the end of this video. Of the 7 letters, 5 of them contain a warning. Some gentle, some terrifying. But 5 churches hear the words, "I have this against you." And then there are 2 churches that receive no correction at all, no rebuke, no warning, nothing but praise from the mouth of God. And you would never, ever guess which 2 they are. Because by every standard the world uses, by the standard your own eyes would use, if you walked through their doors, those 2 churches were the failures. The poorest, the weakest, the ones you would have driven past without slowing down. We will get to them, but not yet. First, we have to go to the biggest church of the ancient world. A church that did everything right. A church that could recite the truth line by line, without a single mistake. A church with only one problem. It had forgotten why it started. Ephesus was the church everyone wanted to be. Picture the city itself. Ephesus was one of the largest cities in the entire Roman world, a harbor town packed with 250,000 people, marble streets, a theater that could seat 25,000, and at the center of it all, the Temple of Artemis. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. 120 columns of white stone, each one taller than a 6-story building. People sailed across the sea just to stand in its shadow. And right there, in the middle of all that pagan grandeur, was a church that refused to blink. Listen to what Jesus says about them. They worked hard. They endured hardship without growing weary. They could not stand wicked men. They tested people who claimed to be apostles and exposed the liars. They hated the very practices Jesus hated. On paper, this is a flawless church. If you handed their doctrinal statement to any pastor alive today, he would sign it and frame it. And then comes one sentence that lands like a dropped glass in a silent room. But I have this against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first. Here's what most people miss. Jesus does not accuse them of getting the truth wrong. He accuses them of getting the truth right and feeling nothing. They had become experts on a person they had stopped loving. They could win the argument and lose the reason they started arguing. And Jesus tells them, in effect, that a church can be doctrinally perfect and spiritually dead at the same time. You can know every word of the love letter by heart and forget the face of the one who wrote it. But it gets stranger because the very next letter goes to the opposite kind of church entirely. Smyrna. If Ephesus was the church that had everything, Smyrna was the church that had nothing. Jesus says to them, "I know your afflictions and your poverty." And the Greek word he uses there is not the word for a working man who is short on cash. It is the word for a beggar. Absolute destitution. This was a persecuted church, hunted, shut out of the marketplace, some of them jailed, some of them killed, and dirt poor on top of it all. And to that church, the failing, freezing, dying church, Jesus says something he says to no one else. He offers no correction. None. Instead, he says, I know your poverty, yet you are rich. Now watch the detail no one points out. Smyrna was a strikingly beautiful city, built up the slope of a hill called Mount Pagos, and its finest public buildings ran in a ring around the summit. Ancient writers said that from a distance, the city wore its buildings like a garland, like a crown around its head. The people of Smyrna were proud of it. They called it the crown of Smyrna. So when Jesus says to this church, be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life, he is using their own skyline against their fear. The Greek word is Stephanos, not a king's jeweled crown. The Stephanos was the wreath they placed on the head of an athlete who won the games. The victor's crown. Jesus is telling a church that is losing everything in a city famous for its crown, that the real crown goes to the one who finishes the race. And roughly 60 years after John wrote this down, an old man was dragged into the stadium at Smyrna and ordered to curse Christ to save his life. His name was Polycarp, and he had been a disciple of John himself. He looked at the Roman official and said, 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king, who saved me? They burned him alive in that stadium. The oldest detailed account of a Christian martyrdom we possess is his, the martyrdom of Polycarp. And it happened in the one city Jesus had promised the crown of life. The crown was real. It just wasn't the kind you could see from the harbor. Stay with me, because the third city raises the stakes higher than either. Pergamum sat on a mountain that rose 1,000 feet straight up out of the plain, and it was crowned, there is that word again, with temples. It was the religious capital of the province, the first city in Asia to build a temple to a living Roman emperor. And on the shoulder of that mountain stood one structure above all the others, an enormous altar to Zeus, a horseshoe of white marble carved, with gods at war, so large you could see it from far below. To the church living in the shadow of that altar, Jesus says, I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. You feel the weight of that. He is not being vague. He is pointing to a church surrounded by the machinery of emperor worship, on a hill dominated by one monstrous altar. He says, I know exactly which street you're on. I know what you can see from your window. You live at the address of the enemy himself. And then he names a name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city. Antipas. The word Jesus uses for him is martis, the Greek word for a witness in a courtroom. But because so many of these witnesses ended up dead for what they testified, that single word, martis, became our word, martyr. Church tradition remembers Antipas as a leader in Pergamum who was sealed inside a hollow bronze bull and roasted alive over a fire. And Jesus does not forget his name. On a rock in the middle of the sea, decades later, he speaks it out loud to be written down forever. Do you see the pattern forming? 3 cities. 3 completely different letters. The rich church scolded for its cold heart. The poor church crowned without a single complaint. The trapped church told, I see your address, and I have not forgotten you're dead. Every word aimed at a place you could point to on a map, which raises a question you should be asking by now, and I want you to keep it in the back of your mind for the rest of this video. If Jesus were writing a letter to your city, what local detail would he reach for? Let me stop for just a moment, because we are exactly halfway, and I don't want you to lose the thread that ties all of this together. 3 churches so far, and not one generic word among them. Jesus did not send a form letter 7 times. He looked at each city, its water, its wealth, its skyline, its dead, and he wrote to that. Which means these letters were never really about the past. They were about the terrifying idea that God pays attention to the specific place you are standing. So here is what I'd ask of you. If this is opening up the book of Revelation in a way it never has before, take 1 second to subscribe. It genuinely helps these get made. And while you're at it, Keep a running count in your head. Of the 7, which letter is starting to feel like it has your address on it? Hold that answer. We'll come back to it. Because the next 4 cities are where this stops being history and starts getting personal. The 4th letter is the strange one, because Thyatira was the smallest and least important of all 7 cities, and it received the longest letter of them all. Thyatira had no great temple, no wonder of the world, no famous acropolis. What it had was work. It was a factory town, a city of trade guilds, bakers, potters, bronze workers, tanners, and above all, dyers. Thyatira was famous across the empire for a deep red-purple dye, and if that detail rings a faint bell, it should. Open the book of Acts, and you'll meet a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth, from the city of Thyatira, the very first convert on European soil. That was Thyatira's business. Color, cloth, commerce. And commerce is exactly where the knife went in. Here's the part nobody tells you about those trade guilds. To work in Thyatira, you almost had to belong to a guild, and every guild had a patron god. The guild feasts were held in the temple. The meat was sacrificed to idols. The evenings often ended in things a Christian could not touch. So a believer in Thyatira faced a brutal, quiet choice that had nothing to do with a Roman soldier at the door. Go to the guild feast, bow where everyone bows, and keep feeding your family. Or refuse, and watch the work dry up. And someone in that church had found a way to make the compromise sound spiritual. Jesus calls her Jezebel, not her real name, but the name of the most infamous idol pusher in Israel's history. She was teaching the believers that they could have both. Bow on the outside, believe on the inside. Keep the contract and keep the faith. And Jesus, whose eyes John describes as like blazing fire, says no. Do you feel how modern that is? Nobody was threatening their lives. They were threatening their livelihoods. And that is a temptation most of us understand far better than martyrdom. The pressure to shave off one uncomfortable edge of your faith, so the paycheck keeps coming. Thyatira felt that squeeze 2,000 years ago, in a dye shop, at a guild dinner, with the rent due, and a family to feed. And the smallest church got the longest letter, because the quietest compromise is the one you can rationalize for years before you ever notice it changed you. Which brings us to a city that could not see anything at all because it was asleep. Sardis. Sardis was old money. Centuries earlier, it had been the capital of a kingdom, so wealthy its king's name became a byword for riches, Croesus, as in rich as Croesus. And the city sat on top of a plateau, with cliffs falling away on almost every side, a natural fortress, so steep that everyone agreed it simply could not be taken. And this is where it gets remarkable, because history had already proven them wrong. Twice. The Greek historian Herodotus tells the story. Centuries before, an enemy soldier watched a defender of Sardis climb down the unclimbable cliff to retrieve a dropped helmet, and by watching, learned the route. That night the attackers went up the path the defenders had left unguarded, because who guards a wall no one can climb? The impregnable city fell, not because the wall failed, because the watchmen stopped watching. And astonishingly, centuries after that, it happened a second time, the same way. So when Jesus writes to the church at Sardis, listen to the words he chooses. Wake up, strengthen what remains. If you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come. A thief who climbs the unguarded path to a city that fell twice in its sleep. Every citizen of Sardis knew those stories the way you know the disasters of your own hometown. And Jesus reaches straight for the civic nightmare. Then he says the line that should stop every comfortable church cold. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. A reputation. Sardis still had the name, still had the address, the buildings, the history, the brand. What it had lost was the pulse. It's possible, Jesus says, to keep the sign lit over a business that closed years ago. And now, after the megachurch that forgot its love, the trade town that sold its edge, and the fortress that slept through its own death, we come to the letter that turns the whole pattern inside out. Philadelphia. Philadelphia was a small city, prone to earthquakes, and by every visible measure it was weak. And Jesus, who has by now found something to correct in almost every church, finds nothing. He says, I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. And then the promise that has hung in churches ever since. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. Stop and count with me. Of the 7, we now have 2 churches that received no rebuke at all. Not a single I have this against you. And here they are, side by side. Smyrna, the beggar-poor, persecuted, dying church. And Philadelphia, the one Jesus himself calls weak, the one with little strength. Remember the 2 failures I told you about at the very beginning? The 2 churches the world would have driven past, without slowing down? This is them. The 2 weakest churches on the list were the only 2 heaven had nothing to correct. It was not that they were big. It was not that they were strong. It was not that they were impressive. They were faithful, and that was the only word Jesus needed. And if that reversal surprises you, hold on. Because there is still one city left, the 7th. And it was the richest, most successful, most self-satisfied church of them all. It is also the only church Jesus threatens to vomit out of his mouth. Laodicea was the city that had won. If Smyrna was the beggar and Philadelphia was the weakling, Laodicea was the champion. It sat at the crossroads of 3 major trade roads, and the money poured through it like water through a mill. It was a banking center, so much so that when a massive earthquake leveled the city around the year 60, the Roman historian Tacitus records something almost unbelievable. Rome offered aid, as it did for ruined cities, and Laodicea waved it off. They rebuilt the entire city out of their own pocket. No help from the emperor, no help from anyone. Tacitus writes that they recovered, with no assistance from us. Sit with that for a second, because it's the whole key to the letter. This was a city whose civic personality was one sentence. We don't need anything from anyone. And they had the receipts. Laodicea was famous for 3 things across the empire. First, banking in gold. Second, a rare glossy black wool that made luxury garments the whole region wanted. Pliny the Elder writes about it. And third, a medical school that produced a famous eye ointment, a Phrygian powder used to treat ailments of the eye. Gold, garments, eye salve. Hold on to those 3, because Jesus is about to hand them all back. But first, the water. Here is the one detail that unlocks the most misunderstood verse in the whole book. Laodicea had a wealth problem it could not buy its way out of. It had no good water of its own, so it piped water in. To the north sat Hierapolis, with its famous hot mineral springs, water that steamed and healed. To the east sat Colossae, fed by cold, fresh mountain streams you'd cup in your hands and drink. Both were prized. Hot water that soothed, cold water that refreshed. Both good, both useful. And Laodicea, sitting on its rich plateau, had neither at the source. Its water traveled for miles down aqueducts. The geographer Strabo describes the water of this region, and by the time it arrived, the hot had cooled, and the cold had warmed, and what came out of the pipe was tepid, mineral-heavy, and faintly nauseating. Lukewarm. Now read what Jesus says to them. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. The Greek word for lukewarm is klearos. It appears exactly once in the entire New Testament, right here. And for centuries, people have read this verse backwards. They think cold means the hardened sinner, hot means the on-fire believer, and lukewarm means the mediocre Christian in between, so they conclude that Jesus would rather you be an atheist than a half-hearted believer, which never quite made sense. But that's not the picture at all. Cold water was good. Hot water was good. Hierapolis healed with hot. Colossae refreshed with cold. Jesus isn't wishing they were spiritually frozen. He's saying, be useful. Be the hot spring that heals or the cold stream that revives. Be something. Instead, you are your own water supply, tepid, self-made, and good for nothing, but making the mouth recoil. And the word he uses for spit you out is not gentle either. It's emeo. It doesn't mean reject, or set aside, or turn away from. It means vomit, to gag and expel. Which brings us to the only image that does this justice. And it's one you already know in your own body. You have, at some point, lifted a glass to your mouth expecting cold water and gotten it warm. Or reached for a mug of coffee you were sure was still hot and found it had gone tepid on the counter while you weren't looking. And do you remember what your body did? It didn't ask your permission. It didn't wait for you to weigh the options. Before your brain even finished filing the complaint, your mouth had already recoiled, your face had already twisted, and maybe you spit it straight back into the cup without a single conscious thought. That reflex, the one you cannot fake, the one your own body performs a half-second before your mind catches up, that is the exact image Jesus reached for. And read it again, because it's stranger than we let it be. He did not say this church made him angry. He did not say it broke his heart, though surely it did. He said it made him gag, not rage, not hatred, a gag reflex. And here is the part that should land somewhere uncomfortable in your chest. A cold glass of water, you can drink. A steaming cup, you can drink. The only thing your body throws back is the cup that couldn't be bothered to be either one. He is saying that a self-satisfied, self-sufficient, we don't need anything church does to him exactly what a mouthful of lukewarm water does to you. And then, having gotten their full attention, he hands their whole city back to them. Listen, you say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear, so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes, so you can see. Gold, to the banking city. White clothes, to the black wool city. Eye salve, to the city with the famous eye medicine. Every single thing Laodicea was proud of, Jesus names, and tells them the real version is something only he can give, and they've been too rich to notice they're bankrupt. This is the great reversal the whole video has been walking toward. The poorest church, Smyrna, he called rich. The weakest church, Philadelphia, he left an open door. And the richest, strongest, most self-made church of them all he calls wretched, poor, blind, and naked. Wealth was never the danger. Persecution was never the real threat. The thing that made Jesus gag was a church so comfortable it stopped needing him. And now the most famous verse in all 7 letters, and it's not saying what you were taught it says. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. You've seen it on 100 greeting cards, aimed at the unbeliever's heart. But look at who Jesus is talking to. He is not standing outside a sinner's heart. He is standing outside his own church. The Laodicean church has become so full of itself that Christ himself is on the porch, knocking to be let back into the room he was supposed to own. And he is still knocking. So let me leave you with 3 things to carry out of this. The first is this. Every one of these letters was local, which is exactly why every one of them was real. Jesus did not write to the church in the abstract. He wrote to Ephesus about its forgotten love, to Smyrna about its crown, to Pergamum about its altar, to Thyatira about its guilds, to Sardis about its sleeping guards, to Philadelphia about its open door, and to Laodicea about the tepid water in its own cup. He knew their streets, and that means the God of Revelation is not a God of vague generalities. He knows your street too. He knows the specific shape of the specific pressure you are under this week. These letters prove he pays attention to the details you assume no one notices. The second is harder. Look at which churches were in danger. It was not the poor one. It was not the persecuted one. It was not the weak one. Smyrna was bleeding and Jesus called her rich. Philadelphia was weak and Jesus held her door open. The churches in real danger were the comfortable ones, Ephesus, Sardis, and Laodicea. The ones with money, reputation, and nothing pressing in from outside. The threat was never the persecution at the gate. The threat was the comfort at the table. Persecution drives a church to its knees. Comfort just lets it fall asleep sitting up. Sure, it's fine. Sure, it needs nothing. Right up until the moment Christ is knocking from the wrong side of the door. And if you have ever quietly thanked God that your faith has never cost you much, that letter might have your name on it. And the third, go back and count one more time. 6 of the 7 letters carried a warning, but not one of them ended there. Every single letter, even the one he threatened to spit out, ended with a promise. To the one who overcomes. To the one who opens the door. Jesus did not write 7 churches to condemn them. He wrote to wake them up while there was still time. Even Laodicea, the church that made him gag, got a knock instead of a verdict. That is who is standing at the door. So here's my question for you, and I want you to actually answer it. Of the 7, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, which one felt like it had your address on it? Which letter made you a little uncomfortable? Tell me in the comments. And be honest. The honest ones are the ones he can do something with. Because 2,000 years ago, an old man on a rock in the sea wrote down 7 letters to 7 cities that are ruins now. The cities are gone. The people are dust. But the voice that dictated them is not finished, and the 7th letter never really closed. He is still standing at the door, and he is still knocking.